The movie begins with a fisherman named Colin, who is seen fishing at sea. When he pulls up his net, he unexpectedly catches a beautiful woman among the fish. Colin immediately saves the woman by giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The strange thing is, the woman is still alive even though she has swallowed a lot of water. Colin tries to get help, but the woman insists that she's fine and doesn't want to be seen by others. Additionally, she can't remember her name. In the end, Colin decides not to call the police and takes the woman to an empty house that once belonged to his late mother. He leaves her there alone because he has something important to do. Colin then goes to his ex-wife, Carla, to pick up their daughter, Annie, and take her to the hospital. Annie has a kidney condition, so she needs weekly dialysis. While waiting for the dialysis to finish, Colin tells his daughter a story about a fisherman who found a beautiful woman in his net. Soon, Annie finishes her dialysis, and she's surprised when the hospital lends her an electric wheelchair. Annie is thrilled with the wheelchair, especially since she loves playing with the buttons. Afterward, Colin takes Annie back to her mother's house, where they find Carla's boyfriend, Alex. It turns out that Carla and Alex often drink, but they still care for Annie. The next day, as Colin is about to go fishing again, he sees the beautiful woman he found the previous day. During their conversation, the woman asks Colin if she can join him in fishing. When Colin asks for her name again, the woman replies that her name means woman from the sea. Eventually, Colin agrees to take her along. Unfortunately, Colin only catches a few fish. At this point, the woman, named ONDINE, begins singing with her enchanting voice. When Colin pulls up his net again, he's shocked to find a large number of giant lobsters. It seems that ONDINE's singing brings him good luck, as he catches a massive haul that day. Upon returning to the island, Colin invites ONDINE to join him in town to sell the catch, but ONDINE declines because she doesn't want to meet anyone other than Colin. After selling the lobsters, Colin goes to a store to buy clothes for ONDINE, then picks up his daughter from school. Along the way, Annie asks Colin to continue the story. According to Annie, the woman in the story is a selkie, a mythological creature, a seal that can turn into a human. After dropping Annie off at Carla's house, Colin returns home. Meanwhile, Annie, curious about her father's story, decides to follow him. When Colin returns to his late mother's house, he gives ONDINE food and new clothes. ONDINE is delighted with the gifts and kisses Colin on the cheek as a sign of gratitude. Meanwhile, Annie suspects that her father is hiding something at her grandmother's house, so she goes to the library to research selkies. The next day, curious Annie decides to visit her grandmother's house. There, she sees a woman swimming in the sea for the first time, and she realizes that this must be ONDINE. Annie is convinced that the woman before her is not human but a selkie. Annie tells ONDINE that she knows a lot about her and why she came to the land instead of staying in the sea. She is also certain that ONDINE has lost her seal coat, which, according to legend, prevents her from returning to the sea without it. That day, Annie and ONDINE become friends. In the next scene, we see a man staring out at the vast ocean as if searching for something. The following day, Colin invites ONDINE to join him at sea again. There, he teaches her how to operate the boat. However, while at sea, a marine officer passes by them, and ONDINE hides in fear. She uses her feet to steer the boat, which makes Colin uncomfortable. Afterward, ONDINE starts singing again. Strangely, Colin's net fills with fish, an extraordinary catch, as no one ever catches salmon with a net. However, some marine officers stop their boat, suspicious of Colin's large catch. The officers suspect that Colin is using an illegal net, but he denies it. The officers search the boat's compartments and find ONDINE hiding. They declare her presence illegal. ONDINE tells the officers that Colin only used an ordinary net to catch the fish, so the officers leave. After this, Colin invites ONDINE to join him at the market to sell the fish. Since ONDINE had already been seen by others, she agrees to go with him. At that moment, ONDINE sees the mysterious man in the distance. When they arrive on the mainland, the other fishermen are amazed because they've never seen such a beautiful woman in their area before. At the market, Colin earns a lot of money selling the fish. Later, they pick up Annie while ONDINE shops for new clothes. Some women watch ONDINE from outside, marveling at her beauty. The next day, Annie visits Undineand Undineine decides to teach Annie how to swim. While swimming, Undineine suddenly stops when her foot touches something underwater, and it turns out to be her lost seal coat. Annie advises her to bury the coat so she can live on land for 7 more years. They bury the coat in the garden behind the house and promise not to tell anyone. Later that afternoon, Colin takes Undineine and Annie to a town festival. Annie tells the legend of the Selkie and asks Undineine to admit she's a Selkie, but the woman denies it. At the festival, the mysterious man seems to be searching for Undineine. Since Undineine refuses to admit she's a Selkie, Annie quickly wheels her wheelchair to the sea.
Annie!
Without hesitation, Undineine jumps into the water to save her. Fortunately, Annie survives. Annie tells her father that Undineine finds peace underwater. Later, Colin takes Annie home and accompanies Undineine back to his late mother's house. Once there, Colin reveals that he was once an alcoholic, which is why he didn't get custody of Annie. This prompted him to change for his daughter's sake. That night, Colin and Undineine are overcome by their feelings and share a tender moment. The next day, Colin visits a church and confesses to a priest about his fear of losing Undineine. Afterward, Colin accompanies Annie to her dialysis treatment again. When they return home, they can't find Carla, so Annie leads her father to a bar. There, they see Carla and Alex playing pool and drinking. Colin asks for permission to let Annie stay with him, but Carla refuses and sarcastically tells him to go romance his mermaid. That night, Undineine is awakened by the sound of an approaching vehicle, and it turns out that the mysterious man has come to find her. When Colin returns home, he discovers that the house has been broken into. He immediately looks for Undineine and finds her by the river. It turns out the mysterious man is Undineine's husband, Tony, and he came to find her. Colin orders her to wish for her husband to leave, believing Annie's claim that Selkies can make any wish come true. However, Undineine's only wish is for Annie to recover, which deeply touches Colin. Meanwhile, a mysterious man was looking for Undineine in the middle of the city. At the same time, the drunk Carla was on her way home with Annie and Alex. Unfortunately, their 2 vehicles collided, causing an accident. Alex was thrown out of the vehicle and died on the spot. At that time, Colin, who had taken Undineine to town, happened to witness the accident. When he realized that it was Carla's car, he panicked. Fortunately, Annie survived the accident. At the hospital, the doctor told Colin that Annie needed an urgent kidney transplant, and it turned out that Alex had a matching kidney tissue for Annie. At the same time, Ondine met with her injured husband. During their conversation, the man asked Ondine to come home with him. Ondine agreed, but on one condition: she didn't want to interfere in his life anymore. On the other hand, Annie's surgery went well, thanks to Ondine's prayers for Annie's speedy recovery. The next day, Colin and Carla scattered Alex's ashes into the ocean. Afterward, Carla allowed Colin to take care of Annie on the condition that Undineine could no longer be with them. That night, Carla forced Colin to join her for a drink at a bar. Initially, Colin refused, but Carla insisted until he finally gave in. When the drunk Colin got home, he began searching for Undineine and found her hiding in his boat. He then took the woman to an island with a lighthouse and many seals on the shore. Colin forced Undineine to get off the island while drunk and left her alone there. Realizing what had happened, Ondine quickly chased after Colin's boat, but unfortunately, she could no longer catch up to it. Undineine felt sad because she had to part ways with him, but Colin told her that humans and Selkies, mythical creatures, couldn't live together. That night, Ondine removed her shoes and clothes despite the freezing water and jumped into the sea to swim. Colin, meanwhile, went to Annie and took her back home. When Annie asked where Undineine was, her father simply replied that she was gone. However, Annie was confident that Undineine would return because she left something behind. The next morning, while Annie was watching TV, she saw a show featuring a man singing. Colin realized that the song the man was singing was the same one that Undineine used to sing frequently. It turned out that it wasn't just an imaginary song, and that Undineine wasn't a fairy tale character. Realizing his mistake, Colin immediately went to the lighthouse. Unfortunately, he couldn't find Ondine there, only her shoes and coat. When Colin spotted ONDINE on the other side of the island, he rushed there. Upon arrival, he saw ONDINE shivering from the cold, and Colin hugged her tightly. In the end, ONDINE revealed the truth about herself. She was a drug dealer from Romania, and together with her husband Tony, they smuggled large amounts of heroin. However, the Coast Guard caught their operation, which was why she jumped into the sea to escape the ambush of the authorities. Tony was arrested because he couldn't swim, while ONDINE was swept away by the waves and drowned. This was the same moment Colin's net caught her, and she was saved. That night, Colin returned ONDINE to her home, but it turned out that there were uninvited guests. Tony was there, and he threatened to kill Annie. Colin and Tony fought, but unfortunately, Tony had his friends with him, and one of them pointed a gun at Colin. Tony soon ordered ONDINE to give him all the drugs to save Colin and Annie. ONDINE revealed where she had hidden the drugs, but when Tony dug up the backyard, they couldn't find them. It turned out that Annie had removed the coat containing the heroin and hidden it elsewhere. In the end, Annie revealed that ONDINE's coat was in the lobster trap. They went to the boat and pulled up the lobster trap. When ONDINE remembered that Tony couldn't swim, she pushed him into the sea. In the end, Tony died while trying to retrieve the heroin from the lobster trap. Later, the police arrested Tony's accomplices, and ONDINE was taken to the police station. The next day, Colin returned to the priest to confess, where the priest mentioned that ONDINE would be deported. However, she could stay in Ireland if she married and became an Irish citizen. Hearing this, Colin asked the priest to bless them in marriage. In the final scene, they were married with Annie's help, and now the small family lives happily ever after. The movie ends here.